Hey guys, how's it going? So it is the fourth day of Litmas, and today we are to talk about our favorite novel. And for me, I've said I don't necessarily have a favorite novel, but if I were to pick one, it would probably be this one. So this is the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, and to the extent that this can be called a novel, it actually precedes The Lord of the Rings in the timeline of the world in which it takes place, and also in when Tolkien actually started writing it, because the Silmarillion was actually the first thing that Tolkien ever started writing, before he ever had any conception of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. Um, he was a philologist, so he worked with languages, and he had started to kind of invent these languages, which became Elvish, in his spare time, just for the fun of it, and sort of got interested in writing a history for them and people to speak these languages. And he was also interested in mythology. He'd read the Kalevala from Finnish mythology. He'd read Beowulf. He was a pretty important Beowulf scholar, and then he just started to write his own mythology for this world, and this became the Silmarillion. And it went through many drafts. There's the History of Middle Earth series that Christopher Tolkien, Tolkien's son, put together, and you see many different renditions of the Silmarillion and various stories from the Silmarillion. Um, and So yeah, these were around before he had any conception of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And originally, The Hobbit wasn't going to be connected to the Silmarillion. Um, Tolkien just started writing a children's story about a Hobbit. But eventually, through the writing process, sort of elements of this from the Silmarillion started to make their way into the Hobbit. There were the elves, of course. There were the dwarves. And uh, and so then the Lord of the Rings, of course, is very much connected with the Silmarillion and makes many references to the Silmarillion. And in fact, after the success of the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien um, at one point went to his publisher and asked if they might publish the Silmarillion finally, and they said no because they read the draft and they thought it was unpublishable. And a lot of people who come to the Silmarillion are kind of put off from it because it is much different from the Lord of the Rings. It's dark and violent and sad. And most of the characters are unlikable. The prose is sort of in this King James Bible esque style. So it's very highfalutin, which is gorgeous to me, but to me at first and to many, it is also very difficult. Um, yeah, I think it is such a powerful work of literature. If I had to give some kind of a way of giving you a brief overview of the plot, or at least the premise, starts with the creation of the world. The Ainur are these angelic beings who help Iluvatar, who is essentially God, create this world. And then there are the Valar, who are the Ainur who decide to descend to the world and to live in the world. So the Valar are kind of like the gods of Middle Earth, a little bit roughly. And then what happens is the elves are created. The Valar take the elves up and take them to live with them. There are two main continents in Arda. There is Aman, where the Valar live. It's a huge continent with mountains all around the coast. And then there is the continent where Middle Earth is. And so the Valar take the elves from Middle Earth, where they emerged, and take them back to Aman to live with them in bliss. And so yeah, and what the main conflict that is set up is by Morgoth, who is kind of the granddaddy of Sauron. And Morgoth has been in opposition with the Valar since the beginning. But by the time the elves emerged, the Valar had sort of taken him prisoner and taken him back to Aman and were kind of holding him hostage. But eventually, he kind of convinced the Valar that he had reformed his ways, that he was good now, and so was kind of allowed to roam around free. And so what happens is this elf is born named Feanor, and Feanor is he's smart, he's strong, he's probably handsome. He just basically has it all, and everyone loves him. He's so charismatic. And eventually what he does is he takes the light from these two trees. Instead of a sun and moon at first on Arda, there are two trees, one with golden light and one with silver light, which would eventually become the sun and moon. And Feanor takes light from these trees and creates these gems called the Silmarils. And these are just, they're supposed to have somewhat magical properties in them because they were made with the light from these trees that when they were so young, when the world was so young. And Morgoth sees the Silmarils at one point and covets them. So he starts whispering in Feanor's ear, telling him, the Valar are going to try to take the Silmarils. They want them for themselves to have the power. And eventually Feanor is convinced, and so he flees Aman with any elves that will follow him to Middle-earth, and settles there, and several other groups of elves go with him who aren't necessarily following him directly, but do go to Middle-earth, and then Morgoth, the Valar kind of realize that Morgoth isn't on their side, and he flees to Middle-earth too, and at that point, Morgoth has stolen the Silmarils, so Feanor tells his 7 sons in Middle-earth that he makes them swear to get the Silmarils back. And that conflict, elves between Morgoth and also elves between elves, actually. One of the things you find out in the Silmarillion is that the elves are not all good. In fact, a lot of them are pretty much assholes. Yeah, it is so powerful. I haven't read it in a long time, but I'm so excited to be rereading it in January, as a buddy read with Elena Macredina, and yeah, so I just thought that I would read the first 2 paragraphs from the Silmarillion, just to give you a taste of the glorious prose you find in this book. So here goes. There was Eru, the one, who in Arda is called Ilúvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Ilúvatar from which he came, and in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding, and increased in unison and harmony. And it came to pass that Ilúvatar called together all the Ainur, and declared to them a mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed. And the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Ilúvatar and were silent. So yeah, that is just a sampling of the wonderful prose in this book. But yeah, this I predict will be on my shelf for a very long time, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, so anyway, that is my favorite novel. So thanks for watching, guys. Bye.